Sacred art is just making the stuff we need to make the liturgy happen. The liturgy can't happen without sacred art. It's not an optional extra. Without vine dressers, without millers, the Mass couldn't happen. So the most essential piece of sacred art, sacred artifice, is the bread and the wine used for Mass. So there's an amazing, mysterious connection between what we bring, what we make for the liturgy, and what God does. It's different. In the Old Testament you brought an animal, in the New Testament you bring the work of hands. So thanks for being here, the first lot of the day. It's great. I don't know if you're lost on the way to coffee, but whether you're lost or you've chosen to be here, I'm just really grateful to start the day with you. Also, as I get to not talk for the rest of the festival, so I can relax. It's the best way around. So what I thought we'd do this morning is take a kind of lo-fi visual tour of my studio. And it's a space I often share with others. This is Michael. It's not some kind of AI image of myself improved. It's Michael Potter who's here. Also Sister Josephine Marie, who's there at the back, has worked in this space too, so I'm really grateful to be able to use this space, and also, most of all, to get to work with other artists in it. So you can see at the moment there are a few things going on. Michael's sculpting a statue of Our Lady of Walsingham, and there's a painting at the back on the right which is waiting to be sent off. And in the back, hanging up, you can see a crucifix which I'm going to be working on next year. So there are different projects on the go, and I thought it'd be cool just to show you around the studio, show you what happens. If there's only one screen working, so if you want to see better, you could move over. But if you have a good, can everyone see okay? Great, okay, so let's begin. If this were like IMAX, there'd be a better frame rate. You'd also be able to stimulate the smell, something like the unwashed coffee, damp walls. So this is, I guess this is the kind of treasury of the studio. It's a bookshelf full of books I've been collecting, coveting, hunting down, borrowing and not returning, since I started as an apprentice about 14 years ago. And the feeling of like working with techniques and with a visual language which has been handed on is a really important part of what I do, of like kind of being part of a chain which stretches back a long way, of not having to invent everything myself, but of being carried along by tradition. And these books are an important connection to all that, all the other artists who have worked within this tradition, making things for the liturgy over many centuries, east and west. So just an example of some of the kind of variety of stuff on the bookshelf. This is a wonderful book about mosaics in Thessaloniki, some of them a millennia and a half old. I've got lots of books about Fra Angelico. I love Fra Angelico. And I'm not sure why Dominicans don't boast about him a bit more. I mean, the greatest liturgical artist of the Catholic Church, maybe. I love French Romanesque sculpture, and these are some beautiful old books with lovely black and white pictures of cathedrals around France. But as well as great picture books, there are also some really good technical books. So this is one of my favorites. It's written by a guy called Theophilus Presbyter. That's his pseudonym. And Theophilus was a Benedictine monk working in Germany about 800 years ago. And he's quite unusual, but because he was kind of well clever, because he's a monk and he could write, and he also made things, and he was also a priest, he's made this technical manual, but it's quite, I think it's the first technical manual that's written by somebody who actually does the craft. Normally it's somebody literate kind of gleaning information, often not very faithfully, from somebody doing the work. And it's a book about all the crafts needed to fit out a church. So painting, working with glass, and metalwork. And it's addressed to an imaginary student. And it's a book full of wonderful detail. Here's how to mix colors for painting beards. There's only one way, apparently. Here's how to paint angels' wings and which colors to use. Here's how to dye glass, how to make silverware, how to build frames for shrines to cast bells, how to build an organ, how to make a thoroughfare look like the New Jerusalem, and so on and so on. Everything that's needed to beautifully furnish God's house. And the book is divided into 3 sections, and each section begins with a kind of theological reflection on the nature of making and craft. And Theophilus, he really comes across very well. He's kind of immersed in the world of Scripture. He's kind of warm-hearted and generous. And he's also just obsessed by what he's doing. He loves like detail. He loves telling you exactly what hammer to use. So he's somebody who's really humble enough to be fascinated by the work he's doing. There are some eccentric pieces of advice. If anyone works with metal here, sometimes when you work with metal, you need to quench it. And there's a passage in the book where he's discussing whether the best method is the urine of a half-starved goat that's only been fed basil for a week. But he says he could also use the urine of a red-haired boy. And he doesn't really come down very firmly either way. But there's a beautiful passage from the beginning of the book that expresses something of the vocation of an artist working for the liturgy. So I'm going to ask my friend Dawn to read it.
Henceforth be inspired to greater ingenuity. With all the striving of your mind, hasten to complete whatever is lacking in the house of the Lord, and without which the divine mysteries and the administering of the offices cannot continue. These are chalices, candlesticks, censers, caskets for holy relics, crosses, missal covers, and all the other things that practical necessity requires for use in the liturgy. If you wish to make these, begin in the following way. ...
That's great. So just to kind of hazard a definition of sacred art is just making the stuff we need to make the liturgy happen. The liturgy can't happen without sacred art. It's not an optional extra. It's a kind of that's not a sales pitch, but does anyone have any ideas why sacred art isn't an optional extra? Any ideas? Think about as happened often in the 20th century, a mass celebrated in secret in a ditch in a gulag. No cathedral, no vestments. Why is sacred art essential there? Go for it.
Because the mass is about physical things, so any art that's physical is going to be important.
Right.
So even just like the host or the bread that
Yeah, exactly.
is important for the art.
So without vine dressers, without millers, the mass couldn't happen. So I guess the most essential piece of sacred art, sacred artifice, is the bread and the wine used for mass. So there's an amazing, mysterious connection between what we bring, what we make for the liturgy, and what God does. It's different. In the Old Testament, you brought an animal. In the New Testament, you bring the work of hands, which is really interesting. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but there you go. So we're going to carry on with the tour. If you could like simulate the sound, it'd be quite quiet, then there'd be an anguished sigh. Bit of Nina Simone when things get a bit too heavy. So I work with a variety of traditional materials. carving, mosaic, and painting. So as well as a well-stocked bookshelf, I've got a well-stocked shelf of materials and colors. So these are the pigments I use to make the paint used in the type of painting I do, which is called egg tempera. So egg tempera is just, it's pretty straightforward. It's just earth or ground up minerals or synthetic pigments mixed with egg yolk. And it's the kind of most common method of painting. There's also wax and caustic. Before artists began experimenting with oil paints, I guess, when was that? Father Patrick might know. 14th century, people started using oil paints, mixing, and it's just downhill ever since, really. So it's a really beautiful media to work with. It's also terribly cruel at times, because when you paint with egg tempera, you're building up many layers of thin layers of paint, and you can't really undo what you've already done. So there's a kind of escalation of effort in something. So here are some of the materials. So again, collected, coveted, borrowed and not returned. This is ultramarine, which is chemically identical to lapis lazuli. Terre verte from somewhere in France, I think Western France. Yellow ochre, ground up clay from near Verona. Brushes to paint with, to paint egg tempera with. These are made from squirrel hair and Kolinsky sable. These are brushes used to paint fresco. They're made from horsehair. Other bits and pieces. We also really like shiny things generally, and also in the studio there's lots of use of gold leaf. So there's another technical book on the bookshelf by a guy called Cennino Cennini, and it was written I think in the 15th century or the 14th century, and Cennini was just a jobbing painter from near Florence, and he writes about egg tempera painting, gessoing and gilding and all sorts of other things. And he's a bit less kind of theological than Theophilus. He's more practical. He peppers the text with business advice, but he also comes across as kind of generous too. He wants to pass on everything he knows about painting. At one point he says, you know, if you're going to paint Our Lady, don't be like those rogues who use imitation gold leaf. You've got to use the real thing. You've got to use the best materials, the best pigments. So at times he can sound very, very pious. But then he goes on to say that you should do this because even if your commissioner can't afford it, if you do good work, you'll get better commissioners. And soon you'll be earning twice as much as everyone else. But then he kind of rounds it all off by saying that even if you're not repaid in this life, God and Our Lady will repay you in the next. So paid work and religion are kind of uncomfortable bedfellows, but Cennini, I think he does a good job of synthesizing them there. So moving on, more materials from Italy. These are the kind of carded glasses we use to make mosaic work. We also use stone, but I haven't got pictures of that. So these are kind of broken up into different shapes. So these are tesserae made with gold leaf. Maria's got some of these. This is a bit of boxwood I rescued from a hedge. Hopefully one day it will become a carving. So moving through the studio. So I want to talk with you a bit about this project, which is one of the things on at the moment in the studio. So last year I got a call from some sisters who are building a retreat center for priests in Wisconsin, and the retreat center will be a chapel surrounded by 12 hermitages. And as part of that, they were calling about a crucifix. But as we began to talk together with Sister Lucia and Mother Mary and Sister Bernadette, we thought, like, since the church doesn't actually exist yet, let's not just put a crucifix inside the church. Let's build a church around the crucifix. Let's imagine the whole space centered on the altar. And one of the ideas we had was using an apse. so that we could have a mural in the apse which kind of contrasted somehow with the crucifix. The only problem was like the foundations of the chapel were already laid, and it was going to be a kind of mock Gothic space, but the sisters, Sister Lucia, Mother Mary, Sister Bernadette, they have this kind of free and spontaneous energy. As we heard yesterday, they're kind of generous in prayer, generous in service, and so they just paused construction work on the chapel. And there were all these construction guys hanging around getting grumpy, while they prayed about the best way forward. And thanks be to God, they decided that they were going to have an apse. I think it helps if you don't have a committee or building regs even or planning permission needed. So this is just a scale model of the space which I've used to kind of fine-tune details and also test out design ideas. And what else is there? So I also built a kind of very crude one-to-one scale model of the chapel to test the sizes. In the end, we decided to make the tabernacle a bit smaller. And so the concept we came up with was to design each element around a different aspect of the theme of Christ's high priesthood. That's the dedication of the space. So it's a chapel for priests, and the dedication is the high priesthood of Christ. So we're going to have a stone altar and a kind of gilded copper tabernacle, and those will feature a depiction of the Annunciation. And the corpus, which is a touch bigger than life size, will be carved in the round, and Christ is wearing a chasuble and a crown, because he's a high priest like Melchizedek of old, priest and king. And in the apse we'll have a kind of a mural which reflects on the theme of Christ's heavenly priesthood. So images from the book of Revelation, ideas from the book of Hebrews, the Lamb of God, the four rivers of paradise flowing from the throne of God, the seraphim, the angels, and so on and so on. And on either side of the apse, at some point there'll be statues of Our Lady and Saint Joseph. So it's going to be a kind of immersive experience. Like sacred art isn't there to teach us something like a Sunday school diagram. It's kind of there to show us that we really are living in the invisible world. It's revealing something to us. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the tabernacle, because that's something that's being made at the moment, and a bit about the process of designing it. So these are chisels I use to work with wood, and I'm making the tabernacle with an amazing metal worker in Austin, Texas. He's called Evan Wilson, and as part of that I've been carving an image for him to use as reference when he begins the metal work. So some more tools, more stuff, electric tools too. So this is this is the original composition we came up with. In fact, it's changed since then. So it shows, obviously, the Archangel Gabriel on the left bearing a scroll, symbolizing the message, "Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you." Mary's been praying, and she's holding a book representing the Word of God, maybe the Psalms. And in this design, she's holding it over her womb. So it symbolizes the mystery of the incarnation of the Logos, the Word becoming flesh within her. But as I was working on this carving, we decided to simplify the design somewhat to make it a bit less jaunty, a bit more monumental, a bit more solemn. And I'll show you so this is, I should also say about that Annunciation carving, it's also a present for Maria for her birthday. So this is the final design. Maria started colouring it in. So it's just the figures are bigger, there's less extra detail. And just to talk a bit about this gospel cover, because amazingly, scholars are pretty sure that Theophilus, the monk we heard from earlier, made this exact cover. And it's a typically effusive example of medieval liturgical art. Like you couldn't get more gems onto it if you wanted to. You can imagine something like this carried in procession, not in a museum or in a book, but carried in procession, incense, shafts of light hitting the metalwork, glimmers of candlelight, something that's almost, the surface is almost kind of alive, you know, it's this hammered metal surface reflects the lights in so many thousands of different ways. And so it's a good example of, we spoke about how sacred art is a practical necessity for the liturgy, but liturgical objects also have another role to play. They need to manifest something of the invisible thing that the rite is orientated towards. So this gospel cover is like a practically useful piece of technology in a way. Like it protects the vellum. They were clamped very tightly shut, which kept the vellum from warping. They were lockable, which kept people from stealing them. But it's obviously not just an ordinary book, it's manifesting someone. Can anyone like pick out what's happening in here? The different things going on? Any ideas? The gospel writers, anything else? Can you go back further? Yeah, maybe. There's something. Any ideas? Any help? Here you go. The cross, yeah. What kind of cross? It's a kind of glorified cross. So I just wonder whether this iconography also relates to the vision of Daniel, which also relates to the kind of end of time. So you can imagine this gospel cover with this kind of eschatological vision being carried to the ambo. And so it's a kind of reenactment of the end of history. When God speaks through his word, Christ comes again. So it's an object which exists in space and time. So this is our design for the overall tabernacle, and like the gospel cover, it's obviously got a practical function. It has to house the Eucharist in a secure and prominent way. So we've used strong materials. We've used limestone, steel, bronze, and brass. But it's also conceived as a kind of icon. So it's a kind of three-dimensional icon of the Annunciation, which relates the Annunciation at Nazareth with the abiding presence of Christ in the tabernacle. So it's Christ dwelling in the womb of the church. Around the doors there are 12 semi-precious stones. And Evan's idea was to relate it to the ephod, which is this garment worn by high priests in the Old Testament specifically when they walked into the Holy of Holies. Each stone representing one of the tribes of Israel. So when the high priest walked into the Holy of Holies, bearing the ephod, he was kind of symbolically carrying all of Israel into the sanctuary. And so that's another way we've tried to relate the tabernacle to the theme of Christ's high priesthood. And even like the keyhole plays a symbolic role. We put it in the door with Our Lady. So she's the kind of gateway to the mystery. And every time a priest opens the tabernacle, each time the Blessed Sacrament is removed, it's a kind of liturgical reenactment of the Annunciation. So I'm going to move through the studio again. Oh, I just show you. So the guy on the right is Evan. I just wanted to show you some of his work. He uses the repose technique. So that's creating a relief in a thin piece of malleable metal with many, many, many thousands of small hammer strokes. So you can see here, he works in the reverse. This is in process, and then the finished image is what you see on the back. So he's begun to hammer out an image of Christ's face. This is one of his finished pieces. So there you can see the repose seen from the front and also in process. So you can see Christ is kind of growing out of the background, and you can just see the lamb which he started working on. This is an example of something a bit more shiny and finished. One of the great things about working within a tradition, within a kind of shared visual language, is it allows you to collaborate with people who are also working within that tradition, because we're not all there are different dialects and different skill sets, but we're all essentially working in the same tradition, so it makes collaboration much easier. So in May, Sister Josephine Marie, who's somewhere in the festival, came to help paint this. Well, actually, I just watched her paint most of it for a month. So that was great because we could straight away work together. We straight away kind of knew the techniques and the language we were decided to use for this piece. And it's just in the studio until I can send it to the commissioner, because egg tempera takes a while to cure before you can varnish it. We were sort of inspired by medieval, well, we were inspired by medieval manuscript illumination, especially, I don't know if anyone knows the life of St. Cuthbert. There were lots of conversations about how to paint fish. So the winds are kind of personified here, as they often are in medieval art, especially. So this is something that Michael's come to the studio for a couple of weeks to help with. Well, actually, just to do. It's a clay maquette for a new carving of Our Lady of Walsingham, and I think you can see the sketch. So this is the sketch Michael was working from. The final piece is going to be in wood, but the great thing about clay is that you can add and subtract. So it's a bit less high stakes than carving something in wood where you can't really add anything. And it's just a kind of process of. If I was doing it, it would look like mud wrestling. When Michael does it, it looks a lot more refined. It's just kind of teasing out the forms, seeing how they connect, and also, especially in the faces, just waiting until you have that spark of recognition, when suddenly there's somebody looking back at you. So I'm aware that I've shown you mostly things which are kind of half completed. So I thought, just to conclude, it would be cool to show you a project from its conception to its completion. So this sketch was the first part of a design process that began about 3 years ago with St. Mary's Catholic Cathedral in Aberdeen. And they had a kind of grey fiberglass crucifix in the sanctuary hanging against the east wall that I think someone gave them in the 70s, and they had to wait for that person to die. It took a long time. And Bishop Hugh was finally galvanized when it's a very diverse city and a very diverse parish, and one of the Indian parishioners said, you know, my Lord, like, in Aberdeen the sky is grey, the buildings are grey, even Jesus is grey. So that's the kind of, and because of that need for colour, Bishop Hugh asked that the new crucifix be based on the San Damiano cross, which you'll all be familiar with. But we decided to add different things to it. So on the left and on the right, there are images on the left of the Nativity, and on the right of the three Marys at the empty tomb, so the resurrection. So you have the Nativity of Christ, the cross of Christ, the resurrection of Christ, and the ascension of Christ, all in kind of one image. So I'll just walk through the steps. We made it over about 9 months, but not consistently, kind of on and off with different people coming at different stages. It's the finished piece. So normally we paint onto a solid tulip wood panel, as Fra Angelico would have done, as Piero della Francesca would have done, but those need kind of hefty oak battens in the back. And because it was actually going to be double-sided, we decided to make it from plywood. So this, my friend goes by the nickname of Woodsy, who helped build it. We had to build it so the side boxes were removable, so we could get it into the studio and also get it into a van when it was finished. So you can see it there with the side boxes not there. The guy on the left is called Ishmael. He used to live in the village. He's a Ukrainian refugee, and he was also a professional wrestler. So it was really helpful to move the thing around. But it's particularly funny because he was the only Muslim, I think, in the village, and he was the guy who had to move the cross around every week or so. So I didn't take pictures of gessoing the cross, but in order to paint with egg tempera, you need to build up a very fine ground of gesso, which is applied in about 20 layers over a day and needs to be about 1 millimeter thick. And once that gesso is applied, you need to kind of sand and recarve any details. So this is an example of a panel where the gesso has been applied and then it's been sanded and recarved. So you end up with this beautifully bright surface to paint on. And the idea with egg tempera is to keep the paint layers quite thin so that some of the luminosity of the gesso goes through the paint and kind of travels back at you. So that's why it's a bit stressful, because you're building up layers but then you lose the translucency in you. There's a lot of scraping off for me anyway. Just a detail of that. Again, I don't have the next stage for the crucifix, but a bit like working with the clay maquette, the first stage of painting is directly onto the panel, maybe with a sketch, but just using pigment without any binder. So it's just pigment and water, and that means you can kind of move the composition around a bit until you find what you want. You're kind of searching for it, adding and removing. I don't know, you might be able to see underneath these figures there's a kind of yellow underpainting, which is just the basic anatomy of each figure. And over the top of that we're placing drapery. And again, we're just looking for that spark of recognition when you feel the saints suddenly there where they hadn't been there before. So this is the cross with the underpainting complete, and then we have to do more sanding on the areas where there's going to be gold, because burnished gold picks up any kind of scratches or anything in the gesso. So all that had to be, I think we spent about a week, 2 or 3 of us, sanding this thing at various points. So again, we're adding more layers, so kind of layering and layering. This is basically clay mixed with a glue which is made from animal hide, and that goes wherever there's gold, and it supplies a kind of cushion to put the gold onto a kind of a surface which gives ever so slightly. So then we applied the gold leaf. Again, this was double-sided with the same image on the back and the front, so I think there are about somewhere between 700 and 1,000 gold leaf. Each leaf is about 8 by 8 centimeters, 3 by 3 inches or so. So what Georgina, who came to help, a really amazing gilder, is doing there is burnishing the gold leaf. When you apply it to the bowl, the red clay, it's still not shiny. You have to wait just the right amount of time, and then with a tool which is called a dog tooth burnisher, and it does look like a dog tooth, and I think they used to be dog teeth, maybe they still are, you burnish the surface. But you have to get the timing just right, which is why we brought in somebody who really knows what they're doing to help with that. So again, I don't have many stages of the painting, partly because when things are going well, you tend to take pictures, but when things go badly, which is basically what it always feels like when you're painting, you stop taking pictures and start panicking. So we started here because we started to think, okay, we're gonna, this is gonna be okay. So you can see some of that is finished or on the way to being finished. And like some areas like the hand, you can see there's no highlight on there. It's just some kind of underpainting. So there are some quite unexpected colors in it if you look up close, because we had to design it to be seen from a long way away. And one of the things you can use to do that is you can contrast cool colors like green with warmer colors like kind of reds and oranges, and that creates the effect of modeling, which is seen better from a distance than kind of dark and light than tone. So we're kind of modeling with color, and we use a hairdryer to speed things up when we need to. So I painted this with my colleague Jim. Here's Jim painting away. And I just included this picture to show that I also did something, not just get other people to do it. So this is the finished cross in the studio. And this, I showed you a few images of the process of this, so I thought I'd show you the finished image. This is a altarpiece with different saints from Cumbria for a parish in the Lake District. So it's for a side altar. I'm not sure if you're allowed to put uncanonized saints on an altarpiece, but we couldn't, the commissioner, Father Philip, and I, we just couldn't resist getting John Bradburn in there. And hopefully he'll be a canonized saint one day. So he's the guy on the left. So both those pieces, the altarpiece and the crucifix, relate to the altar. The crucifix is hanging over it. The altar is on it. Oh, it's on the altar, sorry. Just, again, like sacred art isn't about education, it's about manifestation. When we're at Mass, the whole history of salvation is made present. And we're immersed in the invisible world. And I think really it's the job of sacred art, as well as practically making the Mass possible, to be a kind of manifestation of that invisible realm. And like, how much do we need that in a world where the society, the culture acts as if the invisible world didn't exist? How like refreshing is it to be in a space where everything visible serves the invisible? Like how good is that for us once a week at least? So I thought I'd just finish by reading one of the prefaces to the Canon of the Mass, which was sort of behind this composition of bringing the different elements of the mystery of salvation into one image. So I'll finish by reading this. For by his birth, he brought renewal to humanity's fallen state, and by his suffering cancelled out our sins. By his rising from the dead, he opened the way to eternal life. And by ascending to you, O Father, he has unlocked the gates of heaven. Thanks so much. That's it.